He pinned me against the kitchen counter so fast my knees buckled. The cold edge of the marble pressed into my back, his breath hot and sour in my face, and his hands, those filthy shaking hands, were already reaching where they had no right to be. "Stop," I croaked, my voice a cracked whisper, my body stiff with terror. "Henry, stop." But he didn't. And worse than his weight, worse than the way my old bones screamed, was the sound of my mother's voice from the doorway. "Don't make a fuss, Linda," she said, her arms crossed, lips curled in that icy smirk I'd learned to hate as a girl. "You always overreact. You should be grateful someone still finds you worth touching at your age." That was it. Something inside me cracked. 82 years old, white hair pinned up neatly that morning, wearing my pale blue cardigan and a floral apron. I should have been baking pies, tending roses, writing letters to my grandchildren. Instead, I was fighting off my own stepfather while my own mother, looked on with approval. It wasn't the first time he'd tried. It wasn't even the 10th. But it was the first time I realized I couldn't keep pretending this was just another sick moment to be brushed under the rug. And in that moment, with my heart pounding like it hadn't in decades, I knew I was going to do something nobody in this quiet little town could ever imagine. But before I tell you what I did, you need to understand how I got here. My name is Linda Parker. I'm a retired school librarian from rural Vermont. I have silver blonde hair, the kind people call classic in polite company, and hands weathered from decades of turning pages, making jam and weeding stubborn flower beds. I've never been what you'd call dramatic. I've always been the quiet one, the dependable one, the she'll-be-fine one. And maybe that's why they thought they could get away with it. Henry came into our lives when I was already 50. My father had passed, and my mother, Vivian, was restless. She liked to dress sharp, her nails always painted deep red, her perfume a little too strong for church. When she met Henry, he was all charm. He wore crisp shirts, laughed with his whole face, and made everyone feel like they were his favorite person in the room. But the mask slipped quickly once the wedding cake was eaten and the guests were gone. He had a way of touching me, lingering on my shoulder too long, brushing past me in the hallway just close enough to make my skin crawl. And my mother, she saw it. She had to. But every time I mentioned it, she would laugh. "Oh, Linda, don't be silly. You've been alone too long. You just don't know how to take a compliment." So I learned to keep my mouth shut. Until the night 3 months ago. It was early winter, snow piling against the kitchen door, the smell of cinnamon in the air from the apple crumble I just pulled out of the oven. I was humming to myself, my back turned, when I felt him. His presence, close and heavy. "You look nice tonight, Linda," he murmured, his voice low and oily. I stepped aside, pretending to fuss with the tea towels, hoping he'd move on. But he didn't. His hands caught my wrists and shoved them onto the counter, trapping me there. That's when my mother walked in. And instead of horror, instead of the fierce protection I had naively wished for even at my age, she smiled. "Henry," she said, her tone mock scolding, "don't you two make a mess before dinner. I can't tell you what burned hotter in my chest. Fear, shame, or rage. But something inside me shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even push him away. I just looked at them both. And in my head I began to plan. I wouldn't call the police. Not yet. I wouldn't confront them outright. Not yet. But I would make sure that one day, they'd regret every single time they'd thought I was too old, too weak, or too meek to fight back. And that plan, it started sooner than they could have imagined. The next morning, I poured their coffee like nothing had happened. I even kissed my mother on the cheek as she left for her bridge club. But when Henry leaned in to sniff my hair like he always did, I didn't flinch. Because I had already decided where I'd strike first. And when I did, they would never see it coming. The truth is, my mother had been preparing me for this kind of betrayal my whole life. Just not in the way you might think. When I was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, I remember walking into the living room one night after a bad dream. I expected to find her reading on the couch or knitting like other mothers did. Instead, I found her perched on the arm of a stranger's chair, smoking a cigarette, laughing too loudly. She didn't even look at me when I stood in the doorway in my pajamas. That was the first time I understood that my mother belonged to herself, and that there was no safe place for me except the ones I made for myself. Even back then, she liked men who had presence. That's what she called it. They filled a room, made everyone else feel a little smaller just by being there. Henry was exactly her type. When she brought him home, I was already long past trying to win her approval. I'd lived my own life by then. Married once, divorced quietly, never remarried. I didn't have children. Instead, I had my books, my little house, my garden, and a kind of peace I'd worked hard for. But she didn't like that peace. She'd say things like, "You hide yourself away too much," or, "No wonder you don't have a man, you never make an effort." When Henry started making comments about my clothes, my hair, my figure, it wasn't an accident. She trained me not to push back. Still, for years I kept my distance. Visits were short, polite. I always made sure there was someone else in the room. Then last year my house caught fire. Electrical fault in the kitchen. I lost almost everything in one night. My insurance paid out, but the repairs would take months. My mother insisted I move in with her and Henry, just until things are sorted. I should have known better. The first few weeks were tolerable. Kept to myself. I cooked most nights, cleaned up after, made polite conversation. Henry would hover, sometimes too close, but I told myself it was harmless. Then the comments turned into touches. Touches turned into cornering me in empty rooms. And each time I'd retreat, lock my bedroom door, and tell myself it wasn't worth the fight. But the night he pinned me to the counter, with my mother standing there like she was watching a movie she enjoyed, that changed everything. The next morning I woke up before dawn. I sat on the edge of the bed in my long flannel nightgown, listening to the silence of the house. Somewhere down the hall, my mother's bedroom door was shut, Henry's heavy snoring leaking through. In my head I was making a list. Not a grocery list, not chores. Plan. Step 1. Information. Step 2. Isolation. Step 3. Ruin. Henry was the kind of man who liked control. He kept his finances close, his passwords in his head, his paperwork in a locked drawer in the study. My mother, on the other hand, was careless. She trusted him completely, left her purse open, her bank statements on the counter. If I could get into his accounts, I could make his life very complicated. But first, I needed a reason to be in the study. Later that day, I offered to help organize the bills. "I'm not working, might as well be useful," I said with a smile that must have looked real enough. My mother waved me off, too wrapped up in her crossword, but Henry perked up immediately. "Sure," he said. "Come by the study after lunch. I'll show you the filing system." Filing system, my foot. His system was a locked cabinet, 2 drawers stuffed with neatly labeled folders. Investments, insurance, property, bank accounts. And most interestingly, one labeled private. While he explained where the electricity bills went, I paid more attention to the way he unlocked the cabinet. Right, left, right. 32. 15. 47. I didn't write it down, but I didn't need to. A librarian's memory is good for more than just Dewey Decimal numbers. That night, after they went to bed, I crept into the study. The lock clicked open under my fingers, the combination turning smoothly. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. The private folder was a goldmine. Receipts from a storage unit in town. Set of keys. Several photographs of women I didn't know. Nothing indecent, but the kind of thing that would raise questions if someone's wife found them. And then there was the paperwork. Offshore account details, a property deed in another state, all in his name alone. I smiled in the dark. The next day I started with small moves. I called the storage unit, pretending to be Henry's assistant. "He's out of town," I said, "but I need to confirm the payment status." The clerk was chatty, said Henry always paid 6 months in advance, was due again in 2 weeks. Perfect. I also started keeping a record of everything he did. Dates, times, even what he wore. My mother thought I was knitting in my room at night. In reality, I was building a file that could destroy him. The tension in the house grew without them realizing it. Henry kept testing boundaries, my mother kept making excuses. But I was calm now. Collected. Because for the first time in weeks, I had the upper hand. Then, one afternoon I got my first real chance to use it. It was a Wednesday. My mother had gone to her church ladies' lunch. Henry came home early from running errands, and found me in the kitchen making soup. "You're quiet today," he said, leaning in the doorway. "Just tired," I replied without looking up. He came closer. Too close. I felt the heat of his body before I smelled the stale coffee on his breath. "You should lie down," he murmured, placing a hand on my waist. That's when I turned, holding the ladle like it was a weapon, and said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "Touch me again, Henry, and I'll open that drawer in your study for the whole town to see." He froze. It was the first time I'd ever seen fear flicker in his eyes. But here's the thing about men like Henry. They don't back down, not for long. That night I heard him on the phone in the living room. His voice low, angry. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were about me. I also knew my time was running short. If I was going to make my move, it had to be soon. And the next morning the opportunity came. The phone rang at 9 a.m. My mother answered, her voice all sweet honey. "Oh, Pastor, how lovely to hear from you." She didn't see Henry slip out the back door with a duffel bag. But I did. And I followed him. I'd never been much of a spy before that morning. My life, until recently, had been a collection of quiet routines. Grocery shopping on Tuesdays, gardening on Fridays, book club every other Sunday. The most excitement I ever had was when Mrs. Harrison's cat got stuck in my maple tree. But following Henry through the crisp Vermont morning felt electric. The snow was fresh, powdery, crunching under my boots as I kept a careful distance. He didn't look back once, probably assuming I was at home knitting or peeling apples for a pie. He carried the duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his breath puffing out in white clouds. He wasn't dressed for casual errands. Dark wool coat, gloves, a scarf tucked neatly into his collar. The kind of outfit you wear when you're meeting someone important. He headed toward Main Street, but halfway there, he cut down Maple Hollow Road, toward the industrial park. My stomach tightened. That was where the storage units were. I kept to the far side of the road, ducking behind parked cars and bare-branched trees whenever he slowed. My heart pounded, but not from the cold. Sure enough, he stopped in front of the Hollow storage complex. The place was quiet, only a single clerk in the little glass-fronted office. Henry walked past her without a word, unlocking one of the units at the far end. I stayed back until the metal door rolled up. Then I moved closer, keeping to the shadows. At first glance, the unit looked ordinary. Cardboard boxes, a few plastic bins, an old filing cabinet. But then I saw the safe. It was large, maybe waist-high, the kind you bolt to the floor. And Henry was opening it. From where I crouched, I couldn't see the combination, but I could see what came out. Bundles of cash, thick and crisp. Several small velvet jewelry boxes. And photographs. Dozens of them, stacked in neat piles. He didn't linger over the cash or the jewels. But the photos. He sorted through them slowly, like he was making a decision. I caught flashes of faces, some smiling, some looking away. Women mostly. Few men. One picture, the light caught it just right, and my stomach turned to ice. It was me. Standing in the garden last summer, wearing my yellow sundress, bent over the rose bush. I had never seen that photo before in my life. Henry slid the photos into an envelope, zipped the duffel shut, and locked the safe again. Then he stepped out, rolling the door down with a clang. I ducked behind the next row of units, pressing my back to the cold metal. My breath felt loud in my ears. Why was he keeping pictures of me here? And more importantly, how many other women in those stacks had stories like mine? He left the complex, heading back toward the main road. I stayed where I was, letting the distance grow. My legs felt stiff, my mind racing with possibilities. One thing was certain. I needed to get inside that unit myself. That afternoon, I played the part of the harmless old woman again. I made grilled cheese sandwiches, listened to my mother complain about her bridge partner's poor bidding skills, and nodded along as Henry grunted at the evening news. But inside I was already forming the next step. The storage unit key was in that private folder. Seen it. All I needed was the combination again, which I'd already memorized, and a time when they were both out. And that time came sooner than I thought. 2 days later, my mother announced she and Henry were going to a charity dinner at the country club. "We'll be late," she said, fastening a pearl necklace around her throat. Smiled. "Enjoy yourselves." The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I was in the study. The lock on the cabinet clicked open, and there it was, the key, cool and heavy in my palm. I wrapped it in a tissue, tucked it deep in my coat pocket, and headed out into the freezing night. The storage complex was deserted. A single dim light buzzed over the office. My breath came out in clouds as I slid the key into the lock of Henry's unit. The door rolled up with a groan. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with dust and something metallic. I went straight for the safe. Now, I'm not a safecracker, but I had one advantage. Henry used the same numbers for everything. 32, 15, 47. The dial turned smoothly, the latch clicked, and the heavy door swung open. And that's when I realized Henry's secrets were much darker than I thought. The first shelf was stacked with cash, yes, but the second shelf held something else entirely. Folders. Thick ones. Each labeled with a woman's name. Inside each folder were photos, notes, even copies of driver's licenses. I flipped through one at random. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, maybe mid-30s. There were candid shots of her shopping, walking her dog, eating at a cafe. And then, at the back, a restraining order. Filed against Henry 3 years ago. My hands trembled. The next folder was another woman. Same pattern. Photos, personal details, legal documents. And then I found my own folder. It was thin, but there were enough pages to make my skin crawl. Photos of me in the garden, at the grocery store. Even one of me asleep in the armchair. Notes about my habits. Goes for walks at 7:30 a.m. Keeps spare key in flower pot. And at the very back, a page I recognized. It was my mother's handwriting. A note, "She won't tell anyone. She's too proud." I couldn't breathe. My own mother had been helping him track me. For a moment I just stood there, the cold of the unit pressing into my bones. The rage that bubbled up was so sharp, so clean, it almost scared me. I took my folder along with 3 others at random, stuffed them into my bag and locked everything up again. By the time I got home, Henry and my mother were still out. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence. I had enough to ruin him. Enough to put him away. And enough to make my mother regret every cruel word she'd ever said to me. But I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. Well, I wanted them both to feel it first. The fear. The not knowing. The slow unraveling of control. When they came home, I was already in bed, lights off. But my mind was racing, mapping out every step. Step 1 had been information. Step 2 was about to begin. Isolation. If I could turn them against each other before either one suspected me, I could watch their little empire crumble from the inside. And I already had the perfect way to start. Because the next morning, Henry would find something in his private folder that wasn't there before. Something that would make him wonder if my mother was keeping secrets from him. By dawn I was in the study again. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heating vents, and the smell of yesterday's coffee still hung in the air. My hands didn't shake as I unlocked the cabinet. I was past fear now, well past it. Henry's private folder lay exactly where it had the day before, neat as a preacher's sermon notes. Inside, the receipts, the storage unit paperwork, the photographs. All just as I remembered. I slipped something new between the pages. An envelope containing a single photograph. The photo wasn't of me. It was one of the women from another folder I'd taken. Dark hair, bright smile, caught mid-laugh at a cafe table. On the back, in neat cursive, I'd written, "She says hello." Then, underneath that, just 3 little words. "Call me Vivian." The Vivian was my mother's name, but it wasn't her handwriting. Still, I knew Henry would recognize it instantly. He'd read it as a message meant to rattle him, and it would work. By the time the sun rose, I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee and scrambling eggs. My mother came in wearing her silk robe, her hair wrapped in pink curlers. Henry trailed behind her, his usual smug half-smile in place. I slid plates toward them. "Morning," Henry grunted. My mother hummed distractedly. I watched from the corner of my eye as he took his first sip of coffee, his gaze flicking toward the study. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. He didn't open the folder immediately. He was too careful for that. But later that morning, when my mother was in the shower, I saw him slip into the study. The door didn't quite shut, and I caught the faint rustle of paper. Then came the pause. Then the sound of the chair scraping back hard. When he emerged, he was pale. He went straight to the hallway and stood there, staring at my mother's closed door like he was calculating something. The tension at lunch was thick enough to slice. My mother chattered about the charity dinner. Who was there, what they wore, who made a fool of themselves. Henry didn't touch his food. I pretended not to notice. But inside I was filing away every detail. The way his eyes kept darting to her, the way she caught him looking and frowned slightly. That night the first Raol crack appeared. I was in my room reading when their voices rose down the hall. Not yelling yet, but sharp, clipped exchanges. "You think I don't notice?" Henry's voice low but tight. "Notice what?" my mother snapped back. "Don't play stupid, Vivian. You've been..." He stopped, probably catching himself. The rest was muffled, but I smiled to myself. The next day I took it a step further. When my mother went to the store, I slipped into her purse and slid in one of the photographs from Henry's folder, the woman with the cafe smile again. I tucked it just behind her checkbook, where Henry would be sure to see it if he was snooping. By dinner he'd found it. "How was the store?" he asked, his voice deceptively light. "Fine," my mother replied. "Run into anyone familiar?" She looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing," he said, and stabbed his fork into his meatloaf. Over the next week, I kept fanning the flames. One day, I accidentally left the study door ajar with Henry's cabinet key sitting right there on the desk. When my mother passed by, I made sure she saw it. Another day, I left a slip of paper in Henry's jacket pocket with just a phone number written on it, one that traced back to the storage unit office. They started watching each other more than they watched me. It was working. The tension grew, conversations turned into short exchanges. Dinners ended with one of them storming off. I'd catch them each, separately, sitting in the study flipping through papers, as if trying to confirm the other's betrayal. I didn't rush it. I let them stew. But then one night the tension boiled over, and it was far better than I'd hoped for. It was a Friday, cold enough outside to freeze your breath in seconds. My mother had just poured herself a second glass of wine when Henry came in from the garage, his coat still on. "We need to talk," he said flatly. "About what?" she replied without looking up. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photograph from her purse, sliding it onto the table in front of her. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that? Where did you get it?" His voice rose a notch. She set down her glass, her expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "Have you been going through my things? Don't turn this on me, Vivian. Who is she?" I sat in the living room, just out of sight, my heart pounding with satisfaction. "This is ridiculous," my mother snapped. "I don't know her. Where are you getting these ideas?" "From evidence, Vivian. Hard evidence. You've been lying to me." Her laugh was sharp, mocking. "You're projecting, Henry. You've always been the one keeping secrets." That was it. The first real explosion. They argued for nearly 20 minutes, voices climbing, accusations flying. I heard my name once, my mother accusing him of taking an unhealthy interest in me, and the room went silent for a beat. Then he said something I couldn't make out, and a chair scraped back violently. Moments later, my mother's footsteps came down the hall, brisk and angry. She didn't knock, just barged into my room. "Linda," she said, her voice trembling more with rage than fear. "Have you been telling Henry things about me?" I set my book down calmly. "No, Mother. Why would I?" She stared at me for a long moment, searching for some crack in my expression. Then she left without another word. That night, I knew the real fun was about to begin. Because Henry wasn't the type to let an accusation drop, and my mother wasn't the type to forgive easily. By morning, I'd have them both right where I wanted them, isolated, paranoid, and ready to make mistakes. And sure enough, the very next day, my mother came to me in the kitchen, her voice unusually low. "I think Henry's hiding something from me," she said. I hid my smile behind my coffee mug. "What makes you say that?" "I can't tell you yet. But I need your help to find out." I had her. She didn't know it yet, but by inviting me into her confidence, she'd handed me the perfect cover to dig even deeper into Henry's secrets, and to turn them both into each other's worst enemy. But that night, as I slipped into the study again to set the next trap, I found something I wasn't expecting. The private folder was gone. The cabinet sat there, same lock, same scratch along the side, but when I swung the drawer open, my stomach dropped. The private folder wasn't there. At first, I thought I'd misremembered. Maybe I'd left it in a different section, maybe I'd been too hasty last time. But I went through every file, my hands flipping papers faster, my breath coming sharper. Bills, insurance statements, car registration. No private folder. Henry had moved it. I stood in the dim light of the study, my fingers gripping the edge of the drawer so hard my knuckles ached. That folder was the heart of my plan, the proof, the leverage, the ammunition. Without it, I still had my copies, but I'd lost the easy ability to plant new seeds of doubt. Which meant Henry was getting wise. I shut the drawer quietly, locked it again, and stood still, listening. The house was quiet except for the faint murmur of the TV in the den. Henry was home. My mother too. I could march in there and accuse him, but that wasn't my style. No, this was still a game. I just had to change the rules. The next morning at breakfast, I watched him. Henry poured his coffee like always, but he didn't read the paper. Instead, he sat there, tapping the spoon against the rim of his mug, his eyes darting between me and my mother. "Sleep well?" I asked lightly. He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Better than some people." My mother frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." He took a long sip of coffee, his gaze lingering on me a fraction too long. That was confirmation enough. He knew I'd been in the study. And now, I had to assume he was watching me more closely than ever. I didn't go near the study again for the rest of the day. Instead, I let him think he'd scared me off. I baked an apple pie. I took a long walk to the post office. I even joined my mother for her afternoon TV programs, sitting beside her on the couch like nothing in the world was wrong. But in my head, I was already working on the next move. If I couldn't get into his hiding place, maybe I could make him bring the contents to me. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Henry announced he'd be working late in the study, sorting through paperwork for taxes. My mother groaned. She hated when he got into what she called his obsessive moods. That evening, as she sat knitting in the living room, I slipped into the kitchen, phone in hand, and dialed the storage unit office from the landline. "Hello, this is Hollow Storage," the clerk said. I lowered my voice, pitching it just high enough to sound like a flustered woman in her 50s. "Yes, hi. My husband asked me to check the balance on our account. Henry Thompson. I'm supposed to make sure we're paid up before he brings more things tomorrow." The clerk was happy to oblige. "Let's see. Yes, he's paid through the end of the month, but he did call yesterday to say he'd be bringing in a few boxes." "Boxes?" I repeated, feigning surprise. "Yes, ma'am. Didn't mention what was in them." That was all I needed. If Henry was moving items from the house to the storage unit, then the private folder would be leaving the study soon, and I'd just have to intercept it on its way out. The next day, I put my plan into motion. I woke early, pretended to go for my morning walk, but instead circled back and hid behind the old lilac bushes that lined the driveway. From there I had a perfect view of the garage door. It was cold enough to make my fingertips ache, but I didn't care. I waited. At 9:42 a.m., the garage door creaked open. Henry appeared, carrying a banker's box. He glanced around once, then set it on the hood of his car to adjust his grip. I saw it, the edge of the private folder, peeking out from under a stack of papers. He loaded the box into the back seat, slammed the door and went back inside. Probably for a coat or keys. That was my moment. I slipped from behind the bushes, moving fast for someone my age, my boots barely crunching on the gravel. I opened the back door of the car, slid the folder out, and replaced it with a stack of blank notebooks I'd hidden in my coat pocket. Then I was gone, back behind the bushes, folder pressed to my chest, just as Henry came out again. He didn't notice a thing. Once he drove off, I hurried back into the house through the side door, folder still in hand. My mother was in the kitchen making tea, humming to herself. "Cold out there?" she asked. "Freezing," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. I took the folder to my room, locked the door, and spread its contents out on my bed. It was all there. The photographs, the notes, the documents I'd seen before, and some new ones. Including one I hadn't expected, a handwritten list of dates and names, with amounts of money beside each. Some were small, others in the thousands. And at the very bottom, one name stood out. Vivian Parker. My mother. Next to it, $15,000. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. Henry had been paying my mother. For what? Silence. Assistance. Partnership. It didn't matter. Because now I had proof they were both in this together, and money was involved. I slipped the most incriminating documents into my knitting bag, tucked the rest back into the folder, and crept into the study. The drawer was still locked, but I slid the folder back into its place among the tax records. When Henry returned an hour later, I was in the living room reading. He didn't say a word, but I caught the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. That night I made my move. After dinner, I asked my mother to join me for a cup of tea in the kitchen. She sat at the table, sipping slowly, when I slid the list of names and payments across to her. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is your name is on it. And if Henry is keeping records like this, you should ask yourself why." She tried to laugh it off, but I saw the color drain from her face. "You're making something out of nothing." "Maybe," I said, "but maybe not. And if I were you, I'd keep a closer eye on that man you're living with." It was a calculated strike, just enough to plant doubt without revealing how much I really knew. Because if my mother started to think Henry was keeping secrets from her, she'd begin watching him, maybe even confronting him. And in the cracks of their marriage, I could slip in and finish the job. It worked faster than I expected. The next afternoon, I heard them in the study again, this time yelling, "You think you can just write down my business?" My mother's voice, sharp and high. "It's my business," Henry shot back. "And you're part of it whether you like it or not." There was a crash, something hitting the desk hard, followed by the sound of footsteps storming down the hall. My mother emerged, red-faced, and slammed the bedroom door. For the first time since this started, I thought I saw real fear in Henry's expression when he came out of the study. And that fear told me I was winning. But I didn't realize how close I was to losing everything, until I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. And Henry's silhouette standing in the doorway. The darkness seemed thicker than it should have been, swallowing the faint glow from the street lamp outside my window. I froze, barely breathing, my eyes locked on the figure in the doorway. Henry's broad shoulders blocked most of the light from the hallway. He didn't move for several seconds, just stood there watching. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice steady even though my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with a slow, deliberate click. The air in the room shifted, heavier, tighter. I think you've been going places you shouldn't, he said. His voice low, almost conversational, like we were talking about the weather. I didn't answer. He took another step toward the bed. You've been in the study. You leave the door unlocked, I replied. Hardly my fault if you're careless. His jaw tightened. Careless isn't the word I'd use. He moved closer, and I could see the glint of something in his hand. My pulse spiked, but I kept my face neutral. It wasn't a weapon, it was my knitting bag. I found this in the hall closet, he said, setting it down on the edge of the bed. You've been carrying papers around, Linda. My papers. I didn't bother to deny it. Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't. But here's the thing, Henry. I sat up straighter, my voice sharpening. If anything happens to me, anything, you'll regret it before the week is out. He tilted his head, almost amused. Is that a threat? No, I said. That's a promise. And it doesn't come from me. It comes from the copy of everything you're hiding that's already out of this house. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. His expression tightening into something colder, sharper. You're bluffing, he said. Try me, I replied. Go ahead. See what happens when a certain detective in Burlington gets a manila envelope in the mail with your name all over it. For a moment we just stared at each other, the silence in the room stretching so taut I thought it might snap. Then, without a word, he turned and left, shutting the door behind him. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my chair by the window, my hands gripping the armrests, my ears tuned to every creak and groan of the old house. He knew I'd been in his files. He knew I had something on him. And now he'd either try to neutralize me, or outplay me. Either way, I couldn't wait for his next move. I had to make mine first. The next morning I made a point of acting normal. I brewed coffee, fried bacon, and even made pancakes. My mother was in a foul mood, barely touching her food. Henry didn't look at me once. But I noticed something. He was wearing his Goodwill coat. And when he thought no one was looking, he slipped his car keys into his pocket. He was going to the storage unit. As soon as he left, I pulled on my coat and headed out on foot, cutting across the back field to the old Miller property. From there, I could take the side road that led straight to the industrial park without passing him on the main road. The cold air burned my lungs, but I kept moving. By the time I reached Hollow Storage, his car was already parked out front. I crouched behind the row of units and waited. The sound of a metal door rolling up echoed through the still air. I peeked around the corner. Henry was inside his unit, shoving things into a cardboard box. Papers, envelopes, even a small black notebook. He was moving fast, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Then I saw it, my folder. The one with my name on it. He tossed it into the box without a second thought. He closed the safe, locked it, and carried the box to his car. I stayed low until he drove off. Then I moved. The lock on his unit wasn't complex. I'd watched him open it enough times to know the numbers by heart. I rolled the door up, the cold metal rattling under my hands. Inside, the safe sat in the corner like a silent guard dog. I spun the combination, heart racing. When it opened, I took 3 more folders at random and a small thumb drive tucked in the back. I didn't know what was on it, but I had a feeling it was important. I left everything else exactly as it was, closed the safe, and rolled the door down. By the time I got back to the house, Henry's car was in the driveway. My mother's voice was raised inside, sharp, accusing. I stepped in quietly, listening from the hallway. "You're not going to drag me into whatever mess you've made, Henry," she was saying. "Oh, you've been in it from the start, Vivian," he snapped back. "Don't play the saint now." I walked into the kitchen, setting my knitting bag on the table. "Everything all right?" They both looked at me like I'd just walked into the middle of a crime scene. My mother's face was flushed, Henry's eyes dark and hard. "Fine," my mother said stiffly. Henry didn't say a word. That night, I locked my bedroom door and went through the folders I'd taken. They were all the same pattern: photos, notes, personal information. But the thumb drive was something else entirely. It held scanned documents, hundreds of them. Letters, contracts, even what looked like forged IDs. And in the middle of it all, one file labeled Parker Transfer. I opened it and felt my stomach twist. It was a legal document, transferring a piece of property from my name to Henry's, dated 3 months ago. The signature at the bottom was mine. Only it wasn't. I sat back, the full weight of it hitting me. He'd forged my signature. He was trying to take whatever I had left, and my mother must have known. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival. The next morning I made my decision. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 20 years, Detective Mark Holloway. We'd gone to high school together, lost touch, but I knew he'd become a cop in Burlington. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. "Mark, it's Linda Parker. I need your help. And I need you to keep it quiet for now." He hesitated. "Linda, are you in some kind of trouble?" "You could say that," I said. "But if we do this right, it won't just be me walking away safe. It'll be you closing the biggest case of your career." We agreed to meet in 2 days, at a diner halfway between town and Burlington. I'd bring everything. Now all I had to do was stay alive until then. That night I went to bed early, double-locking my door. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. They stopped right outside my room. And then, the sound of metal scraping against the lock. The sound was faint at first, just a soft, deliberate scrape of metal against metal. If I hadn't been awake already, I might have missed it. But I sat there in the dark, every muscle in my body stiff, listening to the careful, almost hesitant turns of something probing my lock. Henry. No one else in the house would be creeping to my door at this hour with tools in hand. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, bare feet on the carpet. My knitting bag sat in the corner, but the thing I reached for wasn't yarn. It was the heavy metal knitting needle I'd kept tucked along the side, its point sharp from years of use. The scraping stopped. Then the slow, quiet press of the latch. I stepped to the side of the door, holding my breath, my pulse pounding so loud it almost drowned out the sound of the lock finally giving way. The door eased open. A sliver of hallway light cut through the darkness. Henry's shadow appeared first, then the bulk of his frame as he stepped inside. He closed the door behind him, the faint click of the latch locking us in together. "You're up late," I said from the dark, my voice calm but cold. He froze, just for a second, before his eyes adjusted and he found me standing by the dresser. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Or couldn't wait," I replied. He took a step forward. "We need to talk, Linda. I think we're past talking. You've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Taking things. Making trouble." I tilted my head. "And you think breaking into my room in the middle of the night is going to fix that?" He smiled, a slow, unpleasant curl of his lips. "I think you've been making some very bad decisions. And I think it's time we came to an understanding." I kept my tone steady, but I let my words carry weight. "Henry, I've been patient. I've let you and my mother play your little games. But I'm not afraid of you. And if you so much as touch me, the detective in Burlington who already has copies of your files will make sure you don't see daylight for the rest of your life." That flicker of doubt, there it was again in his eyes. He didn't know if I was bluffing, and that was my advantage. "Go back to bed, Henry," I said finally. "Before you make your last bad decision." For a moment I thought he might try something anyway. His jaw flexed, his fists clenched. But then he turned, unlocked the door, and walked out without another word. I locked it again and stayed awake until the first light of dawn crept across my floorboards. That morning I knew 2 things. He was getting desperate. I had to move up my meeting with Detective Holloway. I called the diner and left a message for Mark to meet me that afternoon instead of in 2 days. No details, just urgency in my voice. Now all I had to do was get out of the house without Henry or my mother asking too many questions. At breakfast, I told them I had a doctor's appointment in town. My mother barely looked up from her toast, but Henry's eyes were on me the entire time. Need a ride? He asked casually. No, thank you, I said, forcing a smile. I like the walk. The truth was, I had no intention of walking. Not the whole way. I'd arranged for Mrs. Hanley, a neighbor who owed me a favor, to pick me up at the corner near the old post office. She didn't ask questions when I got in, just drove toward the diner with her usual chatter about the weather and the upcoming church bake sale. By the time we reached the little roadside diner, my nerves were steady again. Mark Holloway was already there, sitting in a booth with 2 coffees steaming in front of him. Linda, he said, standing to hug me. You sounded, well, not like yourself on the phone. I'm not myself, I admitted, sliding into the booth. And you're about to find out why. I handed him the manila envelope I'd brought. Copies of the photos, the forged property transfer, the list of payments with my mother's name on it. He flipped through them slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. This is a lot, he said finally. And if even half of it holds up, your stepfather is in serious trouble. It'll all hold up, I said. And my mother isn't innocent either. We spent the next hour going over every detail, what I'd found, what I suspected, and what I couldn't yet prove. Mark leaned back finally, rubbing his jaw. Here's the thing, Linda. This isn't just petty theft or harassment. This looks like blackmail. Maybe even identity fraud. If I take this to the wrong person in the department, it could leak. If Henry catches wind you've gone to the police, you could be in danger. I smiled grimly. Mark, I'm already in danger. We agreed he'd start a quiet investigation. Check the payment records, trace the property transfer, pull whatever public files he could without alerting Henry. In the meantime, I'd keep my head down at the house. But when I stepped back outside into the cold afternoon air, I spotted something that turned my stomach. Henry's car, parked across the road. He was leaning against the driver's side door, hands in his pockets, watching me. I didn't let myself pause. I walked straight toward him, my expression calm. Out for a drive? Yes. Funny, he said, his voice smooth but tight. I was just about to ask you the same thing. I lied without flinching. Lunch with an old friend. His gaze flicked toward the diner window, where Mark was still visible at the booth. Old friend, huh? Very old, I said, and stepped past him toward the street. But as I walked away, I could feel his eyes burning into my back. When I got home, my mother was waiting in the kitchen, her arms crossed. Henry said he saw you with someone in town, she said. Did he now? I replied, hanging my coat. And here I thought I was allowed to have friends. She studied me for a long moment, her lips pressing into a thin line. Be careful, Linda. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Oh, I said, meeting her gaze. I know exactly what I'm into. That night, I tucked the knitting needle under my pillow before going to sleep. And it was a good thing I did, because just after midnight, I woke to the sound of the back door opening. Not Henry this time. Both Henry's and my mother's voices were in the hallway, whispering urgently. And then, the sound of the study door unlocking. The old floorboards in this house had a way of announcing every step you took. I'd learned over the years exactly where to place my feet so they wouldn't creak. And that night, heart pounding, breath shallow, I needed every ounce of that knowledge. From my bedroom door I could hear them clearly. My mother's voice was low but sharp, Henry's deeper and more urgent. Don't leave it here, she was saying. It's safer here than the unit right now, he replied. If she won't, my mother cut in, but there was no conviction in her tone. I eased the door open a fraction, letting the dim hallway light seep into my room. The study was at the far end of the hall, its door cracked just enough for me to see movement inside. Henry was at the desk, pulling items from the locked drawer, papers, an envelope thick enough to bulge. My mother stood over him, her silk robe tied tightly at the waist, her hair still perfect from earlier in the evening. She's up to something, Henry muttered. I can feel it. Vivian scoffed. Linda's harmless. Then how do you explain the missing pages from my files? His voice was sharper now. Or the fact she's suddenly taking walks into town and meeting with people. My mother's eyes narrowed. Meeting with who? Henry hesitated, and I knew he didn't want to admit he'd followed me. Doesn't matter. Point is, she's not as harmless as you think. I stayed perfectly still, every nerve alert. I didn't know what was in that envelope he'd pulled out, but the way his hand hovered over it told me it was important, maybe the most important piece yet. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, then gathered the rest of the papers back into the drawer. This stays with me now, he said. Vivian crossed her arms. So you don't trust me either. Henry glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Trust is earned, Vivian. That was my opening. I padded back to my room, grabbed the knitting bag where my duplicates of the documents were hidden, and slipped quietly to the back staircase. The old servant stairs led straight to the kitchen without passing the study. Once there, I unlocked the mudroom door and stepped out into the frigid air. I had 20 minutes, maybe less, before they finished their whispered argument upstairs and noticed I was awake. The night was clear, the snow crunching under my boots as I hurried toward Mrs. Hanley's place. I'd arranged something with her earlier in the week, just in case. She kept her old Ford idling out front, a thermos of coffee in the passenger seat. You sure about this, Linda? She asked as I climbed in. Positive, I said. If I don't do it now, I might not get another chance. We drove straight to the all-night copy center in the next town over. The clerk barely looked at us, too busy scrolling on his phone, as I slid the stack of papers across the counter. I need 5 copies of everything, I said, and I need them bound. While the machine whirred and spit out page after incriminating page, I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting Henry's shadow to appear there. By the time we got back, the house was dark again. I slipped inside through the mudroom, my boots leaving faint damp marks on the linoleum. From the kitchen, I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I made it to my room without incident, the fresh copies tucked deep under the false bottom of my dresser drawer. The next morning, Henry was in an unusually good mood. Oh, good. He whistled as he buttered his toast, even poured my mother's coffee for her. It was the kind of cheer that only comes from thinking you've won. I didn't let on. By mid-afternoon, I had my next move lined up. I called Mark Holloway again, told him I had something new for him, something big. We arranged another meet at the diner for the following evening. But I never got there. At 5 p.m., as I was getting ready to leave, my mother appeared in my doorway. Where are you going? She asked. Out, I said simply. With who? Her tone was pointed, almost suspicious. An old friend, I replied. She didn't say anything else, just stood there for a long moment before walking away. But I caught the quick glance she threw over her shoulder, the way her lips tightened. Half an hour later I stepped out the front door, and there was Henry leaning against his car. Going somewhere? He asked. I told your wife, I said, brushing past him toward the road. He fell into step beside me. We should talk. I don't think we should, I said, not breaking stride. He stopped then, his voice dropping low. You don't want to make me your enemy, Linda. I turned to face him fully. Henry, you've been my enemy from the day you married my mother. The difference now is I finally have the means to do something about it. That flicker of fear was back, but so was something else. Resolve. He wasn't going to let me go without trying something. I made it 3 blocks before the sound of a car pulling up beside me made me glance over. It wasn't Henry, it was Mark Holloway. Get in, he said. Change of plans. Once inside, he told me the bad news. Linda, I can't hold off any longer. If half of what's in these documents is true, Henry's involved in multiple federal crimes. But someone in my department might be tipping him off. We have to move now, before he hides the rest or skips town. What do you need from me? Yes. Your testimony, Mark said. And the originals. Tonight. We drove straight to the small substation outside Burlington, where Mark locked the documents in an evidence safe. Stay somewhere else tonight, he advised. If he knows we're coming, he'll be dangerous. I shook my head. If I leave now, he wins. I'm not giving him that satisfaction. Mark didn't like it, but he didn't argue. We'll have someone there first thing in the morning. When I got back, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I checked the study, empty. The kitchen, empty. Then I heard it. Stairs. In my room. I took the back stairs, keeping to the shadows. My bedroom door was open, light spilling into the hall. Inside, Henry was rifling through my dresser. And in his hand, one of the copies I'd made. Henry didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked pleased. Like a cat finally catching the mouse it had been toying with. "Well," he said, holding the bound stack of papers in one hand, "this explains a lot." "Put those down," I said, my voice low but firm. He smirked. "These look an awful lot like my files. And here I was, thinking you didn't have the guts to steal from me." I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me. "Those aren't your files anymore, Henry. They belong to the police now." His smile faltered for half a second, then returned, tighter. "You've been busy. Busier than you know." He flipped through a few pages, stopping at the forged property transfer. "This one's my favorite. You really think anyone's going to believe you didn't sign it? You've lived in this town your whole life, Linda. People here trust me a hell of a lot more than they trust the quiet old lady in the cardigan." "Maybe they used to," I said, "but not after they see the rest of what you've been hiding." His eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw something dangerous flicker there. "You don't understand, do you? This," he waved the papers, "this isn't just about you. If you keep pushing, you're going to drag your mother down too. She'll go to prison, Linda." That made me pause. Not because I didn't believe him, oh, I did. Vivian's name was on that payment list for a reason. But because he thought that would stop me. "You think I'm afraid of that?" I asked quietly. He tilted his head, studying me. "You're not like her. You still care, somewhere under all that stubbornness. I can use that." I took a slow step forward. "No, Henry. You've used it your whole life. And now I'm going to use you." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't win. Power wins. Control wins. And right now I have both." "You had both," I corrected. He moved suddenly, shoving the papers into his coat pocket and stepping toward the door. I blocked him. "You're not walking out of here with those. Move, Linda." His voice was calm, but the way his hand twitched told me he was 1 second away from getting physical. "Do it," I said. "Lay a hand on me. Give me one more thing to hand over to the police." We stood there, inches apart, the air between us charged. I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave, hear the subtle hitch in his breathing. Then he stepped back. Not much, just enough to make me realize he wasn't going to risk it. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, and walked past me, leaving the door wide open. But here's the thing. Henry didn't know that the copy he'd just taken wasn't my only one. It wasn't even my best one. The originals were locked away in Mark Holloway's evidence safe, which meant Henry had just stolen a decoy. And I'd let him. The rest of the night, the house was a storm without sound. Doors opening and closing softly, footsteps pacing, the faint creak of floorboards under restless weight. I stayed in my room, sitting by the window, watching the reflection of my own steady face in the glass. Because now it was about patience. The next morning, my mother avoided me entirely. I could hear her in the kitchen, moving dishes, but she didn't call me for breakfast. When I went in, Henry was already gone. "Early start?" asked casually. Vivian didn't look at me. He had things to do. I bet he did. I spent the day making myself visible, walking into town, chatting with Mrs. Hanley on her porch, even dropping by the church to leave cookies for the pastor. I wanted Henry to know I was out in public talking to people. I wanted the paranoia to dig in deep. When I got back in the afternoon, Mark was waiting in his car at the end of the driveway. "You've got about 12 hours, he said quietly as I leaned in his window. "We're serving the warrant tomorrow morning. Keep him calm until then. No sudden moves." I almost laughed. Henry's never calm. That night at dinner, Henry was all politeness again, pulling out my mother's chair, asking me if I wanted more potatoes, even complimenting the roast. But every time our eyes met, I saw the question in his. What else does she have? At 10 p.m. I heard the study door close. I waited a full 5 minutes before slipping down the back stairs and easing up to the crack of light beneath the door. Henry was on the phone. "No," he was saying, his voice low and tense. "She doesn't have everything. But she's got enough to make it messy. I can handle it. No, you're not listening. If it comes out, it's not just me." Then softer. "Yes. Even her." That was all I needed. He just admitted, even if not by name, that my mother was implicated. I went back to my room, heart racing, not from fear, but from knowing I was hours away from ending this. But Henry had one last move to make. At 2 a.m., I woke to the faint scent of gasoline. I sat up, every nerve screaming. From the hallway, I heard the soft whoosh of liquid being poured. Gasoline. Once you've smelled it, you never forget it. Sharp, oily, choking. It filled my nose before my brain could catch up, before my eyes even opened all the way. I sat bolt upright in bed, the adrenaline hitting like a hammer. This wasn't a spill. This was deliberate. The sound came next, liquid glugging from a container, then soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet sinking into the old rug, and reached for the knitting needle I kept under my pillow. Not because it would save me from a fire, but because it would give me the nerve to move without panicking. I eased my bedroom door open. The faint glow from the downstairs hallway told me the lights were on in the foyer. And that's when I saw it. Shiny streaks on the wood floor, glistening under the light. Gasoline. Leading straight to the front door. Henry was in the middle of the foyer, holding the red gas can, his back to me. He was calm, too calm, as he poured another trail across the base of the staircase. "What are you doing, Henry?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. He turned, and for a moment there was nothing in his expression. Just emptiness. Then he smiled. "Cleaning up a mess," he said. "You think burning this house down will solve your problems?" "Yes." I shrugged. "It'll solve you. And her," he added, tilting his head toward the closed door of my mother's bedroom. That made my blood go cold. "Vivian's in there. Wasn't planning on telling her," he said casually. I stepped forward, gripping the knitting needle like a dagger. "Put it down, Henry." He laughed, low and humorless. "You really think you scare me? You've been a thorn in my side for months, Linda, but you're still just an old woman. An old woman who knows more about you than you can afford." His jaw tightened, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. Then, without warning, he yanked a lighter from his pocket and flicked it. The tiny flame danced, reflected in the slick gasoline trails at our feet. That was my moment. I lunged forward, driving the knitting needle hard into the fleshy part of his forearm. He yelped, dropping the lighter, which clattered harmlessly across the tile. He swung at me with his other arm, catching me in the shoulder and sending me sprawling against the banister. The gas can tipped, more liquid spilling. The smell was so thick now it made my eyes water. But I didn't let go of the knitting needle. I scrambled to my feet, planting myself between him and the lighter. "It's over, Henry. The police are already coming. They have everything." For the first time I saw it, real fear in his eyes. And then pounding on the front door. "Henry Thompson. Burlington Police. Open up." His head whipped toward the sound, his face draining of color. I didn't move. "I told you," I said quietly. The door burst open, 2 officers stepping inside, weapons drawn. Mark Holloway was right behind them, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The gas can, the lighter, the trails on the floor, Henry's bleeding arm. "Hands where we can see them, Henry," Mark ordered. For a moment, I thought Henry might try something desperate. But the fight drained out of him. He dropped the gas can and raised his hands slowly. Vivian's bedroom door flew open. My mother appeared, robe clutched tight, eyes wide. "What's going on?" Mark turned to her. "Ma'am, you might want to sit down. We're going to need to ask you some questions." "Down at the station." She looked from him to Henry, then to me. "Linda, what did you do?" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I stopped pretending you didn't know exactly what kind of man you married." They cuffed Henry right there in the foyer. He didn't say a word as they led him out, the gasoline still glistening on the floor. Vivian stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that the world she'd built with Henry had just collapsed in front of her. At the station later, the interviews began. Mark had me go over everything. How I'd found the files, the storage unit, the payment records, the forged transfer. The thumb drive sealed it. The documents on it linked Henry to multiple blackmail cases across 3 states. And Vivian. The $15,000 payment under her name was more than enough to pull her into the net. She tried to spin it, to claim ignorance, but too many of Henry's notes referenced her help in keeping Linda quiet. By dawn, Henry was facing charges for fraud, blackmail, attempted arson, and conspiracy. Vivian was charged as an accessory. When they brought her into the holding area to be processed, she looked at me one last time. "You think you've won," she said softly. "No," I replied. "I just stopped losing." The next week was a blur. Statements, meetings with prosecutors, reporters calling for comments. I ignored them all. The town whispered, of course. Small towns always do. But the whispers didn't sting this time. Because when I walked down Main Street, people didn't just see a quiet old widow anymore. They saw the woman who stood up, fought back, and didn't let a predator and his enabler win. The house was mine again once the investigation sealed Henry and Vivian's fate. The scent of gasoline lingered for a while, but I had the floors scrubbed, the walls painted, and the locks changed. The knitting needle stayed, though, propped in a jar on my kitchen counter. Reminder. Mark stopped by a month later, leaning in my doorway with that easy smile. "You ever think about writing this down?" he asked. "I don't need to," I said, pouring us both coffee. "The people who need to remember will never forget." That night I sat in my chair by the window, watching the quiet street outside. Snow was falling, soft and clean, covering the old tracks and leaving a blank slate. For the first time in years the house felt still, not with tension but with peace. And I realized that survival wasn't just about living through something. It was about reclaiming the space, the air, the silence that had been stolen from you. And I'd done that,